Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over a winter storm in the northern plains. We even have a few blizzard warnings up for parts of South Dakota and Minnesota as of right now. We're going to have your updated snowfall forecast at the end of today's video, so make sure you are staying tuned all the way until the end. Also, if you have any questions or comments, or if you want a personal forecast for your area, just leave a comment down below. We're going to have a ton of information in today's video, so make sure you are staying tuned again all the way until the end so you don't miss any of it. Let's start off with your National Weather Service page. Right now we have some flood watches up for parts of Oregon and Washington, and then some winter weather advisories for a little bit of Idaho and Montana. We have red flag warnings up for parts of Kansas and Nebraska, and then we have wind advisories and high wind warnings in effect for parts of Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, even a little bit of Wyoming, Iowa, and then also into Minnesota, and then scattered throughout parts of Michigan and New York as well. The high wind warnings are the ones that are in that golden color, and the wind advisories are the lighter brown. We have winter weather advisories also up for some parts of South Dakota, Iowa, Minnesota, and North Dakota. And then we have some blizzard warnings in effect for parts of South Dakota and Minnesota. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a couple minutes. We have winter storm watches up for parts of western Minnesota as well, and then we have winter storm warnings up for some of the northern counties in Minnesota as well. Yesterday we had a high temperature of 92 degrees in Rio Grande Village, Texas. The low temperature was 11 degrees, 37 miles northwest of Vernal, Utah. The rainfall data, that website is still not working, so I'm not sure why that's happening, but hopefully they fix that soon, at least for the past couple times I've tried to go on it. It still isn't showing any of the data. So right now, that data is not available. And for the snowfall reports, we had 2 at 6 inches. Green Mountain, California, they got 6 inches. And then Kaiser Point, California, they also got 6 inches of snowfall. So here's a look at those blizzard warnings and kind of a zoomed in look at South Dakota and Minnesota. Again, this is the discussion on the top left hand part of your screen. So right here, this is just a copy and paste from their discussion from the local National Weather Service page, I believe in either Watertown or Sioux Falls. I'm pretty sure it's in Watertown where they put out this discussion. They're talking about 2 to 6 inches of snowfall in these areas, but the reason they have those blizzard warnings up is because we could be seeing gusts as high as 55 miles per hour in those spots. This is from 6 p.m. this evening all the way until 6 p.m. Central Time on Friday. And if you have any local issues or you want to know about the latest road conditions, then contact those websites and numbers right over there, depending on which state you're in, whether Minnesota or South Dakota. Now, the official criteria from the National Weather Service is having winds greater than 35 miles per hour for over or at least 3 hours, and you also have to have visibility that's expected to be less than a quarter of a mile over that time frame, and you do not actually have to have any snowfall falling at that time. You could just have snow on the ground getting picked up by the wind and then causing low visibility, and even that could be considered a blizzard warning. So nowhere in their criteria does it talk about having heavy snow falling. In fact, we're actually going to have fairly light snowfall falling, but because of the winds, it will cause some issues in terms of visibility. And then looking at the included counties, we have Traverse, Big Stone, Marshall, Roberts, Day, Clark, Codington, Grant, Hamlin, and Dual County in both South Dakota and Minnesota. And then some of the cities included are Wheaton, Ortonville, Britain, Sisseton, Webster, Clark, Watertown, Millbank, Haiti, and Clear Lake in both, again, South Dakota and Minnesota. So that's just the blizzard warning. This is where we're expecting the winds to overlap with that snowfall. But in a lot of these areas, you'll not necessarily have as strong of winds, but you will definitely have some snowfall. Now let's start timing this out for you guys. Right now, we actually already have some of this going on. Right now, we do have some snow starting to break out into Minnesota, and it's already been snowing up into areas of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and then also into Ontario as well. Western Ontario is where you would be dealing with that snowfall. One thing that I do want to mention for those of you who live right along Lake Superior, I'm expecting lower snow accumulations than some of the areas to your northwest, and I think a lot of people who live in that area would have expected that, just because if you live in an area for long enough, you're going to realize that if you go maybe a few miles to the northwest, maybe that area, because of elevation or because of topography, is a little bit snowier. Once you start to live in an area for over, I would say, probably 10 years, you definitely do get used to the local terrain and the local weather, even just for a couple years. So I'm sure a lot of people around Lake Superior already know that the lake front will probably be a few degrees warmer than the areas inland, but just in case, just as a reminder, this is still going to apply for this storm. So the lake front by this morning will still be under rain, and it looks like it's going to stay that way for maybe another few hours until we get some colder air to really move through. Now, one issue if you live in eastern Minnesota, eastern Iowa, Wisconsin, the UP of Michigan, is that you have your low pressure center right there, so that's going to be dragging in warm air further to the north, and you're going to actually have the opposite to the west. You're going to actually have some cold air digging in to the Dakotas, so that is already causing some complications in the forecast, that we have this low pressure center making its way as far north as northeastern Minnesota. So for cities like Duluth, you will be on that edge of maybe seeing 1 to 3 inches of snowfall, but you go northwest and you start to get into the 3 to 5 or even 5 to 10 inch snowfall amounts. And if we move this on even through the morning hours, you can continue to see that rain spreading even further to the north, because with the low pressure center moving to the north, the warm air will also move a little bit further to the north. Now, also notice how closely tight these contour lines are. This is indicating a change in pressure. So for example, here's your 1008 millibar line, and then just as another example, we have your 1024 millibar line right here. So you have to shed off about 16 millibars within this relatively small area, and if we even look at a more extreme example, you have to go from, let's say, 992 millibars right here to 1008 millibars right there. So you're also having to shed off maybe 16 millibars within an even closer distance, an even shorter distance. So the winds are definitely going to ramp up, because that's the atmosphere's way of going from a high amount of energy, a high concentration, to a low concentration. So we have high pressure to the west, which is a higher density of colder air, and then you have that low pressure further to the east. So you have rising warmer air, and you have to make that difference. You have to make up that difference somehow, and in this case, it's going to come in not only the way of increasing the amount of moisture being produced, but also the winds. So the winds are really going to amp up with this sharp pressure gradient created between this high pressure and this low pressure. If we move this on, this is when the snow will start to push into areas like North Dakota, especially the central and eastern part of the state. We're still having mixing issues through parts of northern Minnesota. So one of the reasons this is happening is because if you look at this, we do actually have an easterly breeze coming in on this eastern edge of the storm. So areas like Thunder Bay, areas like Duluth will probably stay in the rain a little bit longer than the areas, again, just inland, because you have this relatively mild lake water because of the fairly mild October that we've had and the fairly mild early November for some of these spots. That has made the lakes multiple degrees above normal, so that's going to help out with lake effect. You're going to have more lake effect during the winter most likely, but in this case, when you have an easterly breeze coming in from the east and it's pushing over the lakes, that's also bringing in some of the warmer air that's over the lake. So you're probably going to be around 39 degrees, 38 or 39 degrees. So there will be a big temperature difference between north central Minnesota and northeastern Minnesota, just as one example, and that'll also continue through Ontario. So for again, areas around Lake Superior in Ontario, probably 38 or 39 Fahrenheit, and then you go inland by a few miles and you'll be closer to 33 or 34 Fahrenheit, where it will probably actually start to stick on the ground in terms of the snowfall. This is by the early afternoon, and you can see that we still have that brisk northerly and northwesterly breeze into the northern plains, with the exception of the areas around Lake Superior, who have more of an easterly wind. So now it is starting to at least pile up in some spots of Saskatchewan, also for parts of Manitoba, North Dakota, Western Ontario, Northern Minnesota. These areas are definitely getting a couple inches of snow on the ground by this point. I think a little bit less so in South Dakota or North Dakota. You probably still have about a half an inch to an inch on the ground because of how light the snow is coming down at this point. You are still fairly far removed from the center of the low pressure. So here's where your low pressure center is, and here's where it's snowing. So it's a fairly, that's at least a couple hundred miles between those two areas. So it is going to be a fairly big, at least longitudinal change between northeastern Minnesota and north central North Dakota. And even though on a map it doesn't look like a lot, when you're driving that's going to be at least a few hours of driving in between there. So you have to have some amount of connection to the storm that far away, and that's going to mean that you're not going to have the same intensity. So it might be snowing heavier in north central Minnesota than it will be in northern North Dakota, but that's simply because you are farther away from the center of the storm. It will also be warmer in northeastern Minnesota. So because you're closer to the storm, you have to trade off the cold air for the intensity. So if you do get snowfall at any point, it's probably going to be fairly heavy, at least when it is coming down. Moving this through Thursday evening, and you can see that we're still dealing with that snow moving on down through Minnesota, South Dakota, and North Dakota. Areas up in Manitoba and Ontario also dealing with snowfall, so it's definitely piling up in cities like Winnipeg by this point. And then moving throughout the day, you can see that this storm, which originally overnight, so last night it was all the way down here, it's now moved up into Wisconsin as of when I'm recording this, and I'm recording this right around 11 a.m. Eastern time, which would be which would actually be 10 a.m. Central time. So that's when this is all valid for. And by this point, by Friday early morning, it would already be into northern Minnesota. So it's doing a complete loop, and eventually will actually move back into Wisconsin. So you're going to see a complete loop done by the storm. And while it's doing that loop, it's going to keep parts of eastern Minnesota, Wisconsin, the UP of Michigan, Illinois, Iowa. All of those areas are going to be in the warm sector. So at least for these areas that are east of the storm, you guys will definitely be more in the rain or mixed category compared to the areas that are west of the storm, because these areas will be able to deal with just the cold air, just to that northeasterly or northerly wind, which brings in colder air relative to that southerly or easterly wind that's coming through in some of these areas further to the east. Moving this on along even more, you can see how tightly packed these isobars are. So we're going from 996 millibars right here to here's your 1008 millibar line right there. So that's not a big distance. So it might look a little bit bigger on this map, but really, in terms of meteorology, that's not really too big of a distance to have to go through 12 millibars and to have to cycle through that. So that's going to mean that you're going to have some really strong winds, probably around 50, 55 miles per hour. And that's why we have those blizzard warnings into South Dakota and Minnesota. That's the area where it's going to be snowing, but also really you're going to have to contend with the winds as well. So that's one thing that you want to at least keep in mind. And then by Friday morning, it does start to fall apart. So you're probably going to deal with the most of the accumulation happening overnight. And then by Friday early afternoon, it's pretty much all said and done with. You still do have some snow lingering into Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota, but really it's mostly rain by this point, especially for anywhere east of about Minneapolis. You're going to have areas east of there being almost primarily in the rain category. Moving on to the snowfall maps. So this is the forecasted snowfall from some of these models, and then we're going to look at my personal snowfall forecast. And I took basically a combination of all these, and then also looked at some other factors like how cold it is aloft, which we're going to talk about also in just a couple minutes. So anywhere in that gray color, that's about a tenth of an inch to 2 inches, 2 to 6 inches in the blue, 6 to 10 inches in the purple, and then about 10 plus inches in that pink color. So you can see that we do definitely have an area of maybe 2 to 5 plus in this whole section of western Minnesota, the eastern Dakotas, and also back through northern Minnesota and then up into Canada as well. So these areas definitely looking at probably at least, I would say, 1.5 to 2 inches. Now, this is where I'm having a little bit more of an issue is back over here, because we know it will be warmer just in these areas. Just because you see maybe wintry mix or snowfall maybe projected on the map does not mean that it's necessarily going to stick at all. So I think in some of these areas, especially closer to that center of low pressure for these areas on east, I don't think you're going to actually see too much in the way of accumulation. So even if you might live in, let's say, northern Illinois, or you might live in eastern Iowa, I don't think you're going to actually see much accumulation out of this, if any, because, again, you're going to be too warm, most likely. And also, just because it's being shown in the model that you will see snowfall does not mean that all of that is going to stick. Even for an area like let's say northwestern Iowa, where I think it will probably stick to the ground, I'm not expecting a full 2 inches of snow to fall. I'm thinking that we're probably going to be closer to an inch, maybe 1.5 inches in a lot of these spots, or even less than that. So I'm not expecting a whole lot. So I'm even cutting down on some of the snowfall amounts that this European model is showing. I agree a little bit more with the GFS in terms of the snowfall totals on this map. The GFS is being a little bit more reserved in terms of the amount of snowfall that it's showing, but I do think it will be actually a little bit closer to the placement of the European. So the European model had more snow down into these areas, and I agree with that. I think I agree more with the European's placement, but I don't agree with the total amount of snow being produced by the European. The NAM model is a little bit interesting. We should definitely take some consideration into this, but the NAM model is also one of those models that does have a little bit of an intensity bias, so it does like to overdo how strong some storms are, and it also has a cold bias. So I'm not expecting really 5 inches of snowfall or 4 inches or whatever amount that is for northern Wisconsin to really actually happen. I'm also not expecting all that much snowfall in, let's say, western Wisconsin, southeastern Minnesota, where you have amounts being shown up to 2 inches. I don't think that's actually going to happen. So I do think it's overdoing these amounts right here, but I also do think that in these areas it's actually being quite accurate. So I do think I agree quite closely on the, especially on the northwestern side of the storm, with what the NAM model is showing. And then if we look at just one more model, here's the icon, and you can see I actually do agree with this one quite closely. I do think it's underdoing some snowfall amounts in the northwestern part of the storm, but for this eastern half, I do think it's fairly close to accurate in terms of what's actually going to happen. Now, one thing that will determine the temperatures, or one thing that will determine the snowfall, is the temperatures. So this is something that we always want to pay attention to. So this is for Friday early in the morning, and here's your 32-degree line roughly by this point. It's all the way up here. So this is your freezing line. To the north of here is where you're looking, or to the west of there is where you're looking at 32-degree or lower temperatures. Now let's look at the upper air pattern. Here's the 850 HPA height, which is only a couple thousand feet up. It's really not that high up relative to the surface. And the zero line on here, the 0 degrees Celsius, which is equivalent to 32 Fahrenheit, is right down here. So here's where your freezing line is on the higher up model. So when you're looking at maybe 3,000, 4,000 feet up, really, it's not that high up. It's only a couple thousand feet, and you have that huge difference in terms of the actual temperature. So on the surface, it might be 37 or even 36 degrees on the surface in terms of Fahrenheit. But once you go up maybe a couple thousand feet, you might be actually closer to -5 Celsius, which is right around, I believe, 25, 26 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're getting fairly cold into those areas if that was to be translated down to the surface. So when you have that big change from the surface to the upper atmosphere, or even just to the lower part of the atmosphere, this is really not that high up, that could definitely cause some imbalance within the models, and some of these models might not be picking up on some of the snowfall, which I think could break out into areas like northeastern Minnesota, into other parts of eastern Minnesota. So I think there could be a little bit higher amounts into some of these spots than what is being shown. Also, you don't want to count out some of that snow that might happen into Iowa, especially the western half of the state, and then also into Nebraska. Not a lot of people are talking about the possibility of seeing some snowfall into those spots. I don't think a lot of it is going to really stick too much, but that is something that you want to at least pay attention to. And you have to think about this from the perspective of how these snowflakes are forming. They're starting up very high up, and throughout that entire part of the atmosphere, probably 30, 40, 50,000 feet up, and all the way until they're about 3,000, 2,000 feet above the surface, they're below freezing. So you're coming down with snowflakes, and then as soon as they get into that lower 2,000 feet of the atmosphere, in areas like eastern Minnesota, western Wisconsin, eastern Iowa, it's maybe just a couple degrees too warm and they end up melting, or at least that's what some of the models are expecting to happen. But there are some times where if the intensity is high enough, which in this case I don't think it will be high enough for most spots, but if it were high enough, then you could definitely see some of that snowfall because of how fast it is traveling down to the surface. Some of that snowfall could drop even if it's 36 or 37 degrees. The one area where I think that could happen is northeastern Minnesota, because you have that intensity due to the low pressure center being right here, and you also have the proximity to the storm. You have the temperatures aloft being cold enough. What you just don't have is those surface temperatures. So if the intensity is high enough, you could definitely see the snowfall maybe come down to the surface, and that's something that not a lot of people are talking about, but is something that definitely could happen. Here's also the maximum wind gusts in knots throughout this entire event. So again, this is in knots, not miles per hour. So you do want to convert this over to miles per hour. So just type it into Google, knots to miles per hour, and just type in whatever amount is for your location, and you'll get the equivalent in miles per hour. You can see that the highest amounts are actually going to be over western Nebraska or central Nebraska, western South Dakota, and maybe even into western North Dakota. But if we look at where the snowfall is going to occur, for the most part, it's going to be into these spots right here. And if we look at where the overlap is going to be between the heaviest snowfall and the heaviest or the strongest wind speeds, it's right over here where they have that blizzard warning. So these spots of South Dakota and Minnesota, there is a little isolated pocket where we could be dealing with 5 or more inches of snowfall, and you're overlapping that with winds maybe gusting to 40 or 45 knots, which would be equivalent to 50 or 55 miles per hour. So overall, that's a fairly big thing to have to contend with, where you have to deal with not only the snowfall, but also now the addition of some of that wind. So that's why they have those blizzard warnings up. And personally, I do agree with the decision to put that up, just because there is enough there to warrant that. And also, they didn't put it up for the whole area, which I think would have been too much, considering that the snowfall is going to be fairly light. They only put it up for that one spot where there is many models agreeing that isolated area could see additional snowfall. So personally, I think putting up that blizzard warning is a good thing, because it is going to keep people off the road at least for those 24 to 36 hours when the event is happening. And I think a lot of people were going to go on the roads anyway if there was not that warning put up. So at least it's bringing attention to a lot of people who otherwise would have been traveling around and maybe got stuck in some of these blizzard conditions. Here's my snowfall forecast, and just a disclaimer for those of you who live up in Canada, I don't have a good map that would feature you guys in the snowfall forecast. So since I can't, of course, show it to you on the video, just a comment down below a town or part of a province of where you're from, and then I'll give you a snowfall forecast and a detailed forecast for you guys. I really do want to compensate for not being able to put the map on the screen. I just could not find any good maps that show southern Canada and the United States both together where I would be able to draw over them. So just to make up for that, you guys can definitely leave your town names or wherever you're from Canada in the comment section below, and I will be answering you guys. And that also includes you guys who live in the United States and who are also going to be affected by the storm. If you guys want a more detailed forecast for your location, just leave a comment down below. So less than 3 inches, this is where I'm expecting maybe some accumulation, but not a whole lot. in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, even down through northwestern Iowa, western and northern Minnesota, the northernmost part of Wisconsin, and then the western UP of Michigan. The rest of that area that I have in that pink shade, that's where I'm expecting no accumulation or maybe a mix of rain and snow to occur, where you might see some flakes coming down, but not necessarily anything really sticking down to the ground. By the way, this forecast is valid through Friday afternoon because there will be another storm on Saturday into Sunday, and that's causing some more headaches in terms of the forecast because a lot of people are getting excited for snowfall, maybe in areas further to the south. We're going to discuss all of that later on in the week, so probably by Friday we'll have, maybe probably by tomorrow or Saturday we'll probably have a video out on that. But there's a lot of people getting overhyped for this system because it's showing their area in snowfall in areas like the Great Lakes or Ohio Valley or Northeast. And personally, I'm just waiting a few days because inevitably we're going to see some change in the model. So I'm just going to wait a couple days before making any initial judgments on that storm. But again, this is only for Friday afternoon through Friday afternoon. So anything that happens after that, that would not be valid because we're going to have another system right after this that'll bring more snow into these same exact areas. Now, the next area, here's the 3 to 5 inch spot, and this is for a little bit of northeastern South Dakota. Again, many of these models are showing a little pocket of 3, 4, 5, 6 inches for right over here, which is right where the blizzard warning is. So I would say that if you live in that spot, just realize that some localized areas could see higher amounts, and that's one of the big areas that many of the models are targeting. And personally, when you look at some of the intensity forecasts in terms of the snowfall, I think I would definitely agree with that as well. Eastern North Dakota and northern Minnesota also included, but for those of you who live right along Lake Superior in Minnesota, I did cut you out of that 3 to 5 inch spot, so I'm thinking you guys are probably going to get more 2 to 3 inches, and that would include the areas around Duluth, just because I don't think you're going to be in the snowfall category long enough to see any meaningful accumulation above 3 inches. So I think, again, 2 to 3 inches, maybe even less for some of those spots is possible, and again, it's for a number of reasons. We have not only that low pressure center being so close to your area that it's going to bring in the warm air, but also simply you're closer to that lakefront. So with an easterly wind, that's going to blow it right over the lakefront areas and the lakefront property, meaning that those areas will probably be 3, 4 to 5 degrees warmer than the areas just inland of there. So 3 to 5 inches, not including the areas right along Lake Superior in Minnesota, Wisconsin, or the UP of Michigan, just because I think it'll be a little bit too warm for that. 5 to 10 inches of snowfall. So I have this little spot for, again, northeastern South Dakota. I'm thinking more around 5 to 6 inches of snowfall, but of course, with how I categorize it, it would technically be in that 5 to 10 inch category. So I'm thinking, even though I put you in the 5 to 10 inch area, expect more around 5, 6, 7 inches, and probably not closer to the 10 or 11 inch amounts. Up into northeastern North Dakota, northwestern Minnesota, for that little spot right there, that's where I think you could also get maybe 5 to 6 inches, probably not up to 10 inches. The only area where I think you could get above 10 inches is going to be north central Minnesota. That's where you could fully get between 5 and 10 inches of snowfall, and for that reason, I actually even have a 10 to 15 inch area for north central Minnesota up there as well. And that's where I'm thinking more around 10 or 11 inches of snowfall could definitely fall. So here's all of the numbers on the screen so that you guys can take a look at the forecast if you missed out on which one your area was in. Again, I have that no accumulation and mix further to the south, and then gradually I raise it up all the way up to 10 to 15 inches in parts of Minnesota. That is going to wrap it up for this forecast. Again, if you are in Canada and you don't see your area on the map, you can definitely ask for a forecast in the comment section down below, and I'll give you a forecast with the snowfall amounts for your area. So just leave a comment down below, and I'll cover you guys with the snowfall forecast. If you live in the northern plains in the United States and you want to know about this snowfall forecast for your specific area, again, you can also leave a comment down below and just write a general area of what state you're from or a town name or anything like that, and I'll give you a forecast for your area. So again, that is going to wrap up for today's video. We're going to have a few more interesting snowfall videos coming up over the next couple of days, so that's definitely going to be fun, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.